Imagine a campus with 35 buildings, but they are all for the purpose of scamming.
Someone's actually trying to reach out and scam me.
This is a human crisis. This is happening to your neighbor and your cousin and the person you're sitting next to on that airplane.
When I get text messages saying, Tom, you could be earning £200 an hour if you come work with us.
They have the marketing that people dream of.
I mean, in many cases, these scammers are victims as well, right?
And they're heavily guarded by people with AK-47s.
It's a super important mission, and it's one that I'm very happy to be involved in as well.
This is a turning point in history.
Hello again, and welcome to What the Fraud, a podcast by SumSub, where we expose the darkest corners of digital deception and, of course, meet the heroes who are fighting back. It's still me, Thomas Taraniuk, Head of Partnerships here at SumSub, the global verification platform helping to verify users, businesses, and transactions as well. Today, we're diving into one of the most heart-wrenching and fast-growing frauds out there: pig butchering scams. These aren't your everyday cons. They're highly organized, emotionally manipulative schemes where victims are tricked into handing over their life savings, often after forming fake romantic relationships with their scammers. Since 2020 alone, more than $75 billion could have been stolen from victims worldwide. So this week's guest is at the forefront of investigating and, more importantly, shutting down these pig butchering scams. She's seen the inside of these scam factories to show exactly how they carry out their lucrative crimes. Erin West has spent 26 years as Deputy District Attorney and carried out investigations into cryptocurrency-enabled crimes, SIM swapping, and digital financial fraud. But now, as the president of the anti-fraud initiative, Operation Shamrock, Erin is on a mission to unite the global community, from law enforcement to crypto platforms, NGOs, and more, to expose, to disrupt, and to shut down those fraud networks for good. And today, we're delighted to have Erin on the podcast with us. Erin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I would love to go back to the beginning and rewind. Could you tell me how you got started in this industry? What was your, let's say, first encounter with the world of fraud?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And thanks for having me on the podcast. It's really nice to be here. It's important to me to talk about pig butchering anytime I can, so I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I was a local prosecutor in Santa Clara County for 26 and a half years. I tried all kinds of different cases. And the last 8 years of my career, I was assigned to a high-tech task force where we prosecuted hackers and we prosecuted people who did account takeovers, who stole cryptocurrency. And ultimately, the last 3 years, I really focused on one type of crime, and that type of crime is called pig butchering. It is a long con. As you said, it's a combination romance scam / investment scheme.
From your perspective, how big is the problem currently, Erin?
It's massive. It is probably the biggest problem the globe is facing that you haven't heard about. It's amazing how massive the problem is, and yet how few people actually know what it is. I think everybody can identify having, I got one this morning, a text that appears to be misdirected for someone else, or a text offering a job scheme, or a toll that allegedly you owe. And those are all part of, as it turns out, a massive industrialized scam economy that is happening primarily in Southeast Asia. It's really beyond comprehension how much money is flowing out of so many nations into the hands of organized criminals, and how big the facilities are and how big the industry is that is driving this.
Wow, super interesting. So you're saying, Erin, when I get text messages saying, Tom, you could be earning £200 an hour if you come work with us, I'm not just highly sought after then. Someone's actually trying to reach out and scam me.
I would say the odds are against you being highly sought after in that way. But What I can say is they're just everywhere. And I was with my dad last night. My dad's 80, and he's like, I've started keeping a file of all these. And I was like, what are you going to do with your file, Dad? But that file's going to be thick because it's constant. It's constant. And I can really think of no other circumstance ever in the history of ever where everybody can identify having received this same electronic communication in some way. I mean, they have the marketing that people dream of. They are really able to get this information out to everybody, everywhere, constantly.
It's super scary how they have access to of course, the data and facilitating that outreach as well as two. But not only have you received these messages, you've been on the ground. You've in fact actually come back from the Philippines, a place called, is it Bamban as well, where a huge volume of these scams, including, as you mentioned, pig butchering, are taking place to this day, right? So would you be able to tell us a little bit more about what you saw there, what you did, and what shocked you in the Philippines the most?
Sure. I was really fortunate in that I was able to go along with my colleague, Cesare Podkul, who's writing a book about the scam industry. And it was the second time I'd been to the Philippines. And so we connected again with an organization called the President's, let me tell you exactly what it's called. I have the business card right here. It is the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission. And they really provided us with all kinds of information about the scams the scam factories they are raiding in the Philippines. But they took us to a place called Bamban, and it is about 2 hours out of Metro Manila. And imagine, I don't know where your listeners are in the world, but in Silicon Valley, we have campuses of tech buildings. And imagine a campus with 35 buildings, but they are all for the purpose of scamming. It was a walled-in, locked-down facility where hundreds, thousands of people were in the business of scamming people all over the world. And the Philippine government raided that facility about a year ago, but they've left it primarily intact the way it was at the time of the raid. So when you go into these rooms and you are in the room where these scams took place, there's still scripts on the desks. There's notebooks with notes about who people were talking to in Dublin, in Montenegro, what these people's occupations were, what their names were, their phone numbers. It is a window inside this world that is usually heavily guarded and completely inaccessible.
Is this, let's say, geographically locked to certain regions, Erin, what you saw specifically in the Philippines? Or are you seeing any patterns across different regions when it comes to these kinds of operations? I know you've also spent time, of course, investigating scam hubs in, well, let's say on the Thai-Myanmar border and other places as well.
Yeah, I've had some really unique opportunities to see these scam facilities in Dubai, on the Thai-Myanmar border, and in Cambodia. I took quite a driving trip through Cambodia. And they're all a little bit different, but mostly the same. Mostly they are massive dormitory-style buildings where there is only access one way, and they're heavily guarded by people with AK-47s. What I saw in Cambodia was really extreme in terms of the massive growth and development. It's as if you are walking into Las Vegas during the banner years where things were just growing at constant speed. There are massive buildings under construction. Every place you go is under construction. New roads, new buildings, new cell towers, and all to accommodate this industry that is the primary industry of Cambodia. It's really hard to imagine this phenomenon of massive industrial growth, but the industry is criminal.
It's super scary, isn't it, Erin? I mean, I'd love to discuss the actual human impact of these crimes. Figures from Chainalysis found that in the USA, as much as $9.9 billion was lost to these scams last year in 2024 alone. Are we now just scratching the surface of a much larger growing crisis at hand?
Sure. And there are a few different ways to quantify the size of this. So anecdotally, I can tell you that I am inundated with victims of the financial piece of this. And we can quote all kinds of large numbers, but the point is, on a human level, everyone who comes to me has lost everything they had, whether it's $1 million or $100,000. So the effects are equally devastating. They are going from having a secure financial footing to absolutely having nothing and having to ask friends to buy groceries. So on a human level, it's financially devastating. What we know about the numbers, our best sources are what is reported to the FBI. But we know that even that number is dramatically low. So if you take, first of all, a couple different ways to look at this. Number one, the number is up 40% over last year. It's hard to think of another crime that is growing at that type of rate that isn't the immediate focus of everyone who knows about it. So we're seeing large growth, and we're seeing that the number, interestingly, is as many people are affected over 60 as under 60. I think the world likes to think of this as a crime affecting seniors, but our enemy is so sophisticated that they know how to target 25-year-olds, 45-year-olds, 75-year-olds, and they're doing it at a massive scale. We also know that the number reported to the FBI, if you add up the investment scams plus romance scams, you get a number of about $7 billion for last year. AARP will tell you that maybe 1 in 10 will report a crime like this because it's embarrassing and humiliating, and people don't want to accept that that money is gone. And so say if it's 1 in 10, that means that it's a $70 billion loss just from the United States just last year. If it's 1 in 5, it's a $35 billion loss. Whatever it is, it's a massive outflow of a generation's worth of wealth into the hands of organized crime. That's the scary part of this, is we don't really know where all that money is going, but it's not going to anything positive, that's for sure.
Do you think with people now accessing, let's say, non-fiat currencies and population of crypto increasing tenfold over the relative period, right? Has this helped with the growth of pig butchering scams? Has crypto made it dangerously easy for scammers to drain the victims' bank accounts or, let's say, wallets without raising any red flags at all?
A couple of things worth mentioning is that pig butchering is also committed often by using wires, or often by asking the people to buy gold or to take out cash and have it picked up by a courier in their neighborhood. But I think one of the reasons that this pig butchering involving cryptocurrency investments is so wildly successful is because they're preying on a couple of things at once. Number one, the victims are not familiar with crypto. And so they are able to convince them of things that someone who is really familiar with crypto would not have agreed to or not have been convinced by. Number two, there's a major feeling of FOMO associated with crypto. People have heard and seen the dream of people who've made a lot of money in crypto, and they want to be part of that. So that weighs in favor of the bad actors. Also weighing in their favor is the fact that law enforcement is largely unable to trace it. They're not familiar with it. They don't know what to do with it. They're turning victims away. And so as a result, there's more opportunity for the bad actors to steal more money. We are not ready for the challenge. We are not putting up a decent fight. And crypto enables them to move money quickly, pseudo-anonymously. If they're doing it well, they can protect their identities, and in a way that law enforcement just is not ready to take on such a massive challenge of trying to track all this money down.
It's super difficult, and it's making it easier, one, for these pig butchering scams, or rather the people working under them, to target victims and also facilitate the access to these funds, but also the naivety of maybe going into something new such as crypto can also help them gaining the upper hand, right? So last year, a bank CEO from Kansas in the USA was jailed for 24 years after embezzling over 50 million US dollars from his customers to pay pig butchering scammers. The ripple effects, of course, Erin, reached the entire town, neighbors, families, co-workers, all of these were hit. So how do these scams, from your perspective, fracture entire communities and leave long-lasting damage, Erin?
As a prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, I'm very attuned to how things affect victims. As one of the hallmarks of my practice as a prosecutor was to always be looking out for the victims. But the really unusual thing about this particular case is that there are a number of sets of victims here. One of the key elements of pig butchering is the massive manipulation that is done by the scammers over a lengthy period of time. This is not something that happens in a couple of days. This is a very targeted manipulative strategy in which the enemy has consulted PhDs to figure out how to get people to do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. And they do that using techniques that are very familiar to us: isolating people, putting a time pressure on them, causing anxiety, turning the tables on them and getting mad at them, making them feel unsure of the relationship. So when we think of the original victim of this bank situation, it was the bank president or manager, the leader of this bank, who was targeted and was manipulated to move money. But unfortunately, it crosses a line, and it crosses the line when that bank president starts taking other people's money to do that. Now, we understand manipulation, and I have a lot of empathy for a person who has been manipulated by bad actors. But then he created a waterfall effect that ruined his town. He took money that wasn't his to take, and he gambled it in this way that I understand he was manipulated, but you can't be taking other people's money to put that into a concept of getting yourself out or bailing yourself out or making more money for the bank. And so an entire town in Kansas was really emotionally destroyed by this. And I don't say that lightly. There is a really core feeling of loss when you lose all of your financial stability. And that's what was being experienced in bulk in this town. And then there has to be some responsibility and some accountability for what he did. 24 years seems like a lot of time.
It is a lot of time. Erin, would you be able to share a case perhaps that really captures the emotional manipulation these scammers use from your experience as well? And of course, the human costs it leaves behind in people's lives, maybe.
I just had a conversation recently with one of the first victims I ever talked to. And I revisited that conversation with her this week. And she was the first person that explained the manipulation to me in a way that I could really understand. Sometimes it takes seeing someone that looks and feels like you to be able to understand the decisions that got made. And this is she's a woman just a few years younger than me. She's bright, she's engaging, she's an athlete, she has advanced degrees, and she was just looking for a companion and someone to share her life with, and really felt like she clicked with someone online. And the way she described that relationship was really poignant. It was really like she felt seen in a way that she'd never felt seen before. She felt like the conversations she never felt so cared for before. And she really trusted this person. What I like about her story is she was never trying to get rich. She had some advanced degrees, and so she was significantly in some student loan debt. And he started talking to her about how she could get out of that student loan debt by investing in cryptocurrency in the way that he had. But before they even got there, I talked to her about, how was it that he was able, you never met him. You never even talked to him on the phone. How did that work? And she said that there was always an answer for everything. And it seemed reasonable at the time. Like, one of the things that he told her was that he was compiling the conversations that they'd had and he was putting them into a book, and he wanted to be able to give that to her on their first date. And that his parents had met but been separated when he was in the military, and they had this book of all their love letters, and it was a family treasure. And when you are falling in love and all the emotions that go along with that, something like that can sound really romantic and special. And she kept thinking she was just weeks away from meeting him, and it kept getting delayed and postponed. So I think one of the things that goes undiscussed is that by the time he was able to convince her to do these investments, and she lost the money, and it was very manipulative in the way that it worked. No, she not only lost the money and found herself further in debt, but she missed the companionship that she had gained with this person, that he became her trusted confidant. And that's exactly part of the technique is, let me be the only person you can trust. Let me be the person you rely on. And that's what happened. And it was really a devastating loss for her. But what I will say also about it is she's one of the most resilient people I've ever seen. She's one of those people where
that's great,
where something happened to her, but she wasn't going to let it crush her. And so she took a class to learn how to trace cryptocurrency, and she made friends in the industry to try and figure out what had happened to her.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's always difficult to, of course, not hold animosity towards the perpetrators who've taken, of course, something which is emotionally quite significant, which is always money for a lot of people as well, right? But Erin, do we always think of the scammers as criminals, like in this case, manipulative, nefarious, for instance? I mean, in many cases, these scammers are victims as well, right? Having been trafficked, forced into some of these crimes, and from outside scope, of course, you may think, okay, these are all criminals. They're doing a terrible, terrible thing. But what should, let's say, the public and the policymakers understand about the people who are forced on the Thai-Myanmar border or in the Philippines to commit these scams?
It's very easy for all of us when they first hear about a scam like this to think, oh, what horrible people on the other end of the phone. What kind of evil is behind this? And you're right, there's definitely evil behind this, but it's not exactly what you think. Again, the enemy has used circumstances against us. They've used the unemployment in the Southeast Asia region and in Africa to recruit people to think that they're coming to Asia for a better job. They think that they're coming to work in an office that they're going to be making 3 times what they'd been making before, and they're going to live in a plush live-work facility and do great work. And in fact, when they get there, their passports are taken and their cell phones are taken from them, and they are put into vans and moved into compounds where they are guarded and required to work 16-hour days doing the most inhumane thing you can think of, and that is lying to their fellow humans and trying to steal their money. And so in order to get people who are normal, kind people to do that work, you need to be violent with them. And that's exactly what's happening. The violence in these facilities is outrageous and at the level of war crimes. At the low end of the scale, people are being beaten with baseball bats or made to beat their fellow peers with baseball bats. They're being hit with electric batons. I've seen torture rooms in the Philippines where people were taken to be beaten. I've seen the blood on the wall of those torture rooms. And I've heard from people who've been in these facilities about the really horrific crimes that are executed against them to do this work. So when you think of someone who's on the other end of that phone, they're almost certainly not a willing participant, and they're being forced to do this work for the benefit of organized crime.
Pig butchering scams are just one sign of how fraud is evolving. More personal, more organized, and harder to detect. The What the Fraud Summit brings together global experts in AI, crypto, digital identity, fraud prevention, and compliance to tackle threats like these head on. Join us this November 19th and 20th in Singapore for real conversations and tools businesses need to stay ahead. From deepfake detection and behavioral red flags to next-gen fraud stacks and regulatory foresight. 50 or more speakers, 500 plus attendees, 40% of which are C-level. It's 2 days of keynotes, roundtables, and hands-on workshops designed to help you spot threats sooner and protect what really matters. So secure your spot at sumsub.com/WTF-summit or hit the link in the episode description. Welcome back, Erin. Let's examine what's being done to shut down these scams. At Operation Shamrock, you're on a mission to unite law enforcement, crypto firms, NGOs, and others to stop this type of fraud. So from your perspective, what's the hardest part about getting tech platforms, law enforcement, and financial institutions and banks to work together? What's worked to bridge those gaps in the past?
We have a worldwide crisis here. And in order to solve a worldwide crisis, we need every piece of this ecosystem to be sitting at the table. And this is a situation where this group doesn't usually sit at the same table, and they don't usually share information. Law enforcement, by its nature, doesn't share information. Tech doesn't want to share information and is legally bound to not share a lot of information. Banking has a little leeway for sharing information. But the fact is that this is a turning point in history. This is where we either come together as the good guys against the bad guys, or we continue to operate in this fractured, siloed chaos and allow the bad guys to steal all of our money. So it's difficult. You're trying to engage partners that don't usually work together. You're trying to engage tech and banking to think in a way that maybe doesn't benefit their bottom line, but needs to be done. That there's a bigger crisis at hand, and it's more important than their investors. It's a crisis of how do we protect the world from a really horrific enemy. When you try to solve a problem like this, I think of it like running a marathon, that you're just going to, you're going to run the next 100 yards, and then you're going to run the 100 yards after that. And you build relationships along the way and continue to pick up steam. It reminds me of like a snowball where the more it runs down the hill, the more snow it collects, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you get the people to the table who are ready to sit at the table. And at the moment, banking has been a very good partner at trying to understand the nature of this crime and trying to come up with solutions for it. We've had a little more trouble bringing in our tech partners to really engage and share the information we need them to share. But we won't stop trying, and we won't stop telling the stories that need to be told, because this is a human crisis. This is happening to your neighbor and your cousin and the person you're sitting next to on that airplane. This is everywhere. And if you don't know someone that this has happened to, you just don't know because they haven't told you. Someone in your social circle has been damaged in this way.
It's really difficult to, of course, see how far this has affected people, right, with the underreporting, but you're completely right. And I think when we talk about private institutions actually giving an arm and a leg to try and, in terms of resources, to try and help out, of course, these causes and communicate and share information and data specifically within banking, it can be difficult, Erin, of course. I mean, pig butchering scams, of course, are run across multiple countries, jurisdictions, continents even, and shutting them down completely requires coordination that spans these continents, these companies, and different law enforcement agencies as well. So, Erin, my question to you is, why is international collaboration, especially between Southeast Asia, let's say, and the Western institutions, so complex? Would you be able to share anything about what would help build stronger bridges between these regions and, of course, these institutions?
The first piece is that there is no existing formula for how to do it. We don't have a blueprint to look at. But when you start thinking it through, you can realize that there have been other such coalitions in the past. There are coalitions against terrorism that bring together all different segments of society and international partners to do this. So I think the difficulty is in just finding a framework that suits, but also in finding appropriate leadership. I think this is an area where the United States could and should be a leader in bringing together the opportunity for these conversations to happen. I think that the United States as a government has been largely, I would say there are plenty of opportunities for the US government to step up and start working directly on some of these problems and really getting to know some of the solutions that have worked and are working in the UK and Australia and Singapore, and start by building those coalitions, start by working with the people that are having some success and figure out how to build on that success and not necessarily reinvent the wheel.
I completely agree with you there. And a big part of your work, of course, Erin, is education, especially helping financial institutions and investigators understand what's really happening inside of these compounds. As part of the education drive, you have your own podcast as well, Erin. It's called Stolen. So I'd love to hear more about what you're doing and the sort of stories you've been covering on your podcast.
Thank you so much for asking about my podcast. During my journey of the past 3 years, at first being inundated with victims of this crime, to then learning that this crime is happening on an institutional level, to then actually going over to Asia on a number of trips to understand the root cause of all this, I've met a number of people that are pieces of this puzzle. And I think that we need to start putting the pieces of this puzzle together. We need to start looking at a framework where we can understand what's happening in Asia versus my third episode is with Erin West, who's a crypto expert. Why are they using crypto? How do they use crypto? And for your cousin, what is crypto and what is the blockchain? And help me understand some basics. What I want this podcast to be is an understanding of we are in a new type of warfare. What we have here is we have bad guys that are targeting us, not with bombs, not with physical activity, but with a very targeted digital affront. And that the result of all of this will be draining of fortunes and causing mass chaos. And I think that we are severely underestimating the capability of thousands and thousands of industrialized people who are being forced to do bad activities by organized crime if we are not looking at what their capability is on a global level. And so Stolen is to tell the stories that will make people care about this, tell the stories that will get people to write to their congressman and ask for a national strategy and ask for the government to take seriously what's happening here because we're way behind. And so Stolen is meant to appeal to your neighbors so that they understand what's happening and they are just as aghast as the rest of us about this major crime wave that nobody is talking about.
Erin, it's a super important mission, and it's one that I'm very happy to be involved in as well. But we've mentioned a couple of woes across the board, right? Amid all of these, let's say, issues or worries that we might have, what's giving you hope, Erin, at the end of the day? Are there any breakthroughs, laws, congressmen that you've written to, or partnerships that suggest we're finally turning the corner on a lot of these issues?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this question because there is hope out there. There are good stories that happen every day. One of the pieces of the puzzle is an international collaboration of state and local law enforcement. That never existed before we started building it 3 years ago. And now we have a group of law enforcement that is at the ready to handle these cases. So I'll give you a specific example. A fraud fighter in London reached out to me and said, I'm working with a victim. She was involved in a romance scam and the perpetrator was arrested in Nigeria. The Nigerian police have gone through the phone of that perpetrator, and they have found that there is a victim in Florida. And this victim in Florida has already sent $2.4 million. And she is selling her house. The house closes this week, and she is going to turn over another $1.3 million. Can you help me stop that from happening? And so I put that into the chat of our fantastic crypto coalition. And I'm not joking when I tell you, within 10 minutes, I had a phone number of a police officer in that jurisdiction who was willing to go to this woman's house and stop her from doing it. And he did. And that's where we find ourselves, is that we have built a can-do coalition of people who really care about this. And that's matching Nigerian police with victim services in London, with an American woman who has rounded up law enforcement in the United States. There are opportunities. There are places to make change, and they're happening every day. There are good things happening every day. And if you listen to me, I'm going to complain about a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of really good stuff happening too. So I'm glad you asked me for that story, because there are a lot of stories just like that.
Amazing. And it's really important. And it's more important, of course, past the education, that people do care. And I think it's a very easy story, of course, or type of fraud to care about, because of the amount of people, lives it affects as well. But what a wonderful story as well, Erin. I would love to understand, as we sort of wrap up the show today, if we have a number of different listeners or listener types, right? We have people that work in tech, in fraud and banking, in policy, and many other disciplines. But for those, let's say, that work in technology, they work in policy, government, or banking, what would you say is the one thing that they can do today to disrupt these scams within their sphere?
Oh, that's a great question too. And it's a question I always use in when I speak. I'll say, you're all on notice now. And I know that you all can go back to your own shops and do something 1% better than it was yesterday. And that's a step forward. So what I would look for in my shop today is, who is a partner we can start talking about this with? How do we start breaking down silos little by little? You may not be starting with the exact person in the other organization that can make some change, but yesterday I just spoke with T-Mobile, and I haven't really had great connections with telcos before. I haven't known who to talk to, and this conversation with T-Mobile was one step closer to understanding why telco can't shut this down, or what would it take for telco to shut this down. So I think there are opportunities everywhere for people to reach out to someone else in this problem and start talking about, how can we work better together? I spoke with another woman from the Identity Theft Resource Center, and she was telling me about their capability. I wasn't aware of that they will speak to victims that call them up that have had their identities compromised, and she'll spend the time helping you come up with a strategy to get by. There are plenty of do-gooders, helpful people, and we need to link arms. So find someone to link arms with today.
Completely agree. And it's going to have to be digitally for our listeners, but I'm sure that everyone's on board, right? If you've ever watched one of our podcasts before, Erin, you probably know that at the end of the episode, we do quick fire questions. So to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level, I'd like to send 5 quick fire questions your way. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. So when choosing a digital wallet, do you opt for more features or for better security?
Better security. Always.
Better security. Great answer. What's one thing about fraud that still surprises you to this day, even after all of your experience, Erin?
The grandiosity of how much money can be lost, that how big it can be, how masterful the manipulation can be, that it gets people to do crazy things that they would not ordinarily do. And with you, of course, on this episode, I'm finding out so much more about these types of fraud and how big the actual problem is. And it's probably bigger than that as well. My third question for you, Erin, today is, have you ever been a victim of fraud yourself? Yes. I talk to a lot of victims, and a lot of victims are really upset and feel overlooked, and they're really upset with the system. They think it hasn't worked appropriately for them. And so I spend a lot of time trying to explain the why, the reasons why the police work that way, the reason why banking works that way. And so I was on LinkedIn having a conversation one night with someone and going back and forth texting. And then I went to bed and I was upset for him. He wasn't satisfied. I woke up the next morning and it was pre-dawn and I was scrolling my email and I saw an email and it appeared to be from this victim. And it didn't say it was this victim, but my brain jumped to this victim because this person said, I think you're a big phony. I don't think you actually care about victims. And so I wrote a whole blog about this and and you could post it here. And I was like, oh my God, no, I do. And I clicked on it. And before I even thought, and that's what they do, right? I clicked on, I don't know how many times a day I tell people, don't click on stuff from people you don't know. You never click on, but that's how you do it. You put someone under pressure, under emotion, you trigger them and they do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. And so if you want to trigger Erin West, you don't send her the McAfee thing. You don't tell her she has a toll she has to pay, but you say, I don't think you care about victims. And that got me. And so it really scared me. And I was so thankful I have a task force to drive immediately to and ask what I did and how bad is this problem. But yeah, definitely. It's any given day, any bad day, it could be the day that you are targeted and that you are tricked.
Most definitely. And the scariest part of that for me, and this could be an entirely new podcast episode, is the intelligence gathering and the capabilities to find out so much information through phishing and other means of people like yourself, Erin, and myself as well. The stuff that they'll come back with, I'm just like, okay, well, that's a little bit daunting and crazy, but a whole other can of worms to open, I think. So the second to last, the penultimate quickfire question is, what's one habit you rely on to stay safe online, Erin?
Multi-factor authentication.
Easy answer. I love it. Straight to the point and also secure. If you could have any other career than the one that you have currently, Erin, what would it be?
I would be an investigative journalist. I'm, and I think that's part of why I find this story so compelling. Is there's so much to it. There are so many layers. There are so many stories to tell. I find things and people so interesting, and this story in particular is compelling on every level.
Erin, I couldn't agree with you more. But checking out, of course, your podcast and some of the releases you've done, I would very much say that you are an investigative journalist now in terms of your reach and, of course, the stories that you're telling.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
It's very, very nice to speak with you today, Erin, as well. And thank you for answering some of the most critical questions here today, but also sharing, your experiences, gut-wrenching experiences, and deep diving into fraud, not only through this podcast, but on the ground where it's actually happening. And secondly, for sharing all of the information around what people can do and the impacts it's had, not only on individuals, but businesses, etc. I think finally, of course, there is a big mission to involve both institutions from the West and also governments and task forces from the East as well to come together to solve this problem at hand, because it is bigger than all of us understand and know.
Oh, that sounds great.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of What the Fraud. Coming up next on the What the Fraud podcast, we're taking you straight to the floor of Money 2020 Europe in Amsterdam, where the biggest names in fintech and banking are tackling the toughest questions in fraud and risk. From real-time payments to embedded finance, from AI-driven fraud detection all the way to compliance at scale. This episode puts you in the room with leaders from NatWest, Adobe, HSBC Innovation Banking, Neum, and many more. It's fast, it's sharp, and it's packed with insights from the front lines of modern finance. So don't miss it. Calling all listeners, we need your support. Please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform. And if this episode left you feeling empowered, drop a review. It helps other individuals out there trying to dodge the digital tricksters. So let's cut the small talk and get down to business. Follow, comment, review. You know the drill. And if you want to hear more about what we do at SumSub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification solutions, definitely check out our website at www.sumsub.com and subscribe to all of our socials. What the Fraud is a Listen production. The producer is Adrian Bradley and the executive producer is Nick Minter. The producer from SumSub is Mila Varavina. Stay safe and see you on the next one.